Shalom u'moadim l'simcha lekulam. Welcome to part 3 of M&M Hebrew's Passover series. In today's video, I will be covering the timeline of our forefathers' Exodus in conjunction to the foreshadow of Yahoshua fulfilled throughout the spring feast season. Also, I will be addressing when the Feast of Unleavened Bread begins according to the Enochian calendar and why it must always fall on a Wednesday and much more. So when is the Passover? The first concept we must grasp is the beginning of time. When does a day start? When does it end? What is evening and what is morning? We will start off with the story of creation.
Genesis 1 starting at 1. In the beginning, Yahweh created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of Yahweh was hovering over the face of the waters. Then Yahweh said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And Yahweh saw the light, that it was good. And Yahweh divided the light from the darkness. Yahweh called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So the evening and the morning were the first day.
So let's reinforce this. Yahweh called the light day, and darkness he called night. The first day consisted of both an evening and a morning. So the first word we're going to look into is the word evening, which in Hebrew is called erev, from the word Arav or Arab. And the word Arab means to mix. למשל, היא מערבבת את הפירות. This means she is mixing, she's combining the fruit. Or it also means to intrude or to intervene. הוא התערב בוויכוח שלהם. He intervened, he mixed himself into their argument. You'll also see this word used in reference towards the mixed multitude amongst the Israelites in the wilderness. Obviously, a mixture of more than one race. You'll also see this in reference towards the Arab people. Now, if you're familiar with Mesopotamian history, these lands have been continuously invaded, colonized by a variety of ethnic groups for the last thousands of years, which always results in a mixing of race. So take a look outside your window when the next evening approaches and notice the mixture of light and darkness blending together. So again, Arav means to mix, and evening, Erev, is the composition of light and darkness blended together, and obviously this darkness is going to lead into night. So take note, this is the first or the beginning of a day, evening into morning. So this applies to those of you who have been keeping Shabbat only in the day from sunrise to sunset. We are to keep Shabbat from sunset to sunset. Now let's look into the word boker. If you've been learning Hebrew, that's probably the first word you learned. Boker is morning. And the word boker comes from the word bakar. Sometimes you'll see the word bakar used to imply dawn. Now I say imply because dawn has its own word in Hebrew, which is shachar. So let's read an example from the story of the Levite's concubine that was raped.
So the man took his concubine and brought her out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until morning, boker. And when the day began to break, hashachar, they let her go. Then the woman came as the day was dawning, lifnot haboker, literally meaning facing the morning, or in English terms, before the morning, and fell down at the door of the man's house, where her master was, till it was light.
So according to Torah, the morning begins at sunrise around 6 a.m. And it tells us that the men released us as the morning was approaching and that she got to her doorstep just before morning, lifnot haboker, which is at dawn close to sunrise. The next set of meanings for this word is to inquire, to seek, to criticize, to examine, even to control. So let's start off with the first set of meanings, which is to inquire or to seek of something or someone. And today we use this word as the term to visit someone actually. For example, אני מבקרת את החברה שלי. I am visiting my friend. Now, usually when we're visiting someone, we're seeking out their well-being or even about something. And when Yahweh says he's going to visit us, it's a judgment. Some examples we find in Torah for this word is in Leviticus 13. This is about when the priest inspects a disease. The word inspect is the word for bakal. Ezekiel 34, Yahweh will seek out his sheep. He says that he is going to search out for his lost sheep among the false shepherds, and that he would feed his sheep with judgment. One may say, well, the sheep are innocent. Why do they have to be judged? The sheep actually are not innocent, at least after an extended period of time. There is either something not right inside of that sheep that is blinding themselves from seeing the wickedness and the faultiness in the shepherd's behavior and doctrine. Or maybe even the sheep is lazy and gullible, and that laziness and gullibleness comes from not studying the word for themselves so that they can confirm that what their teacher is teaching is true and that it is the word of Yah. Therefore, they are walking in darkness because of their own lack of diligence in the word. And the list can continue. But we see here that Yahweh seeking out his sheep requires judgment, it requires correction, and it requires some sort of examination or inquiry. Leviticus 19. A man and a handmaid is scourged for fornication. So this passage is about a handmaid who was engaged to a man, and her master would not let her go in her 7th year. So she commits fornication to break free. Now, in this case, she is not stoned as one typically would, but she is scourged. Now, the word for scourge here is also bakal. Why? The punishment of scourging is enacted through the courts. Before any punishment or any judgment is passed, whether it be a stoning, a scourging, a fee that is owed, an investigation, an inquiry, a seeking out process is done, which later results in the judgment. And it is also a form, again, of criticizing and examining a wrong. Now, another meaning of this word, bakar, is to control. So we know in the first set of verses, it tells us that the earth was in darkness and confusion. Therefore, he sent his light to create a division between the darkness. And the light that he sent also controls the darkness. And in terms of inspection and examining and criticizing, which all leads to judgment, it reminds me in Jubilees and Enoch, where it speaks of Yahweh sending his watchers to earth to bring his light into the chaotic and dark world that the world was in and what we still are in. But I want us to move forward, as this is not a study on Genesis or the story of creation. The point that I'm honing in here is what makes up a day, which consists of both evening and morning, sunset and sunrise. So I'm sure we all know the days of creation. The point that I want to drive here is Wednesday. So Wednesday, Yahweh created the sun, the moon, and the stars to fill the sky. So according to the Enochian calendar, we regard the 4th day, Wednesday, as the day time first began. Therefore, we start our calendar count on Wednesdays.
Genesis 1, starting at 14. Then Yahweh said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so. So the evening and the morning were the 4th day.
So again, the evening and the following morning created day 4. So which luminary do we look to that determines our seasons, months, and years? Jubilees chapter 2 tells us that Yahweh appointed specifically the sun to dictate our Shabbats, our months, and our feast, not the moon. Let's read it.
Jubilees 2, starting at 9. And Yahweh appointed the sun to be a great sign on the earth for days and for Shabbats, and for months, and for feasts, and for years, and for Shabbats of years, and for Jubilees, and for all seasons of the years. And it divides the light from the darkness, and for prosperity, that all things may prosper, which shoot and grow on the earth. These 3 kinds he made on the 4th day. Well, according to Isaiah 66, should we come together to worship Yahweh on the new moon?
No, it doesn't. In the Hebrew, it actually says from month to month, chodesh bechodesh. All of your Hebrew reading mores know that it does not say moon to moon, it says month to month. So it should say, and it shall come to pass that from one month to another month, and from one Sabbath to another Sabbath, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith Yahweh.
Doesn't Psalms 81 say we should blow the trumpet for every full moon?
Now, if you look in the Hebrew and you go in the Strongs, it does actually say full moon. Yes, the word here, bakise, actually means full moon, but it also means a covering. Look it up, kaf samech he. This is again another time where you're going to have to go scripture upon scripture, not just look at one verse to validate your doctrine. It says, blow the trumpet at the covering on the solemn feast. Now, what feast is known for blowing the trumpet? That would be, for example, Rosh Hashanah or the fall feast season. In the fall feast season, one of the first feast days is Yom Kippur. Now, Yom Kippur actually is not a feast, but this is a day where our sins are to be covered. And also in the fall feast season, when it is known that we blow our trumpets, it's also Sukkot right after Yom Kippur, and it's about again being covered under his meeting tent and in his spirit. And so we do not look to the moon for our feast. And Moses prophesies again what would happen to our people in the future, that we would keep the lunar calendar.
Jubilee 6, starting at 33. And all the children of Yisrael will forget and will not find the path of the years, and will forget the new months and seasons and Shabbats, and they will go wrong as to all the order of the years. For the book is written before me, and on the heavenly tablets the division of days is ordained, lest they forget the feast of the covenant and walk according to the feast of the Gentiles, after their error and after their ignorance.
Now, the Feast of the Gentiles is obviously like Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, etc., but that's also keeping their calendar. The lunar calendar was invented, number one, by the pagan Gentile Sumerians. And just about every well known Gentile religion follows some form of a lunar calendar, from the Muslims, the Christians, the Buddhists, the Hindus, the Jews, the Kemetic people, the Chinese, Taoism. They all follow some form of a lunar or astronomical calendar. But our forefathers did not, which is one of the things that creates a distinguishment between us and them.
For there will be those who will assuredly make observations of the moon, how it disturbs the seasons, and comes in from year to year 10 days too soon. For this reason, the years will come upon them when they will disturb the order, and make an abominable day the day of testimony, and an unclean day a feast day. And they will confound all the days, the holy with the unclean, and the unclean with the holy. For they will go wrong as to the months and Shabbats and feasts and jubilees.
So last month, Ramadan started for the Muslim community. Now, I don't remember the date, but it was supposed to start on an already pre-calculated set date. And they ended up postponing Ramadan a few days after, or maybe it was the day, don't mark me wrong, but it was after the set date. Because the moon was not yet exactly full. And when I heard this, I thought it was the craziest thing. The moon is what stops you from worshiping your almighty creator. And on another spectrum, I don't know if any other ministries do this, but maybe about 11 years ago, I used to commune with the people who also kept the feast. And they kept the feast on a lunar calendar. Now, the lunar calendar that they kept was not according to the Jewish lunar calendar. They did their own count. And they had a garden, they had land, and they looked at the plants to let them know when the season was approaching. Now, for example, let's just say they had a pomegranate tree. They would look to the tree to tell them, okay, when the first pomegranate blooms off the tree, this now gives us the get-go to start our feast season. Now, all we have to do is just wait for the next full moon. This is idol worship. I also listened to a woman the other day. She had a video speaking about the Enochian calendar. And she dwindled the Enochian calendar down to simply an agricultural calendar. So the fig tree, the barley, and all the agriculture, they are following time. Time is not following the plants. Jubilees just told us that this calendar was written in the heavenly tablets before time. And the first blossom of a tree is never going to fall on the same exact date every year. The agriculture is simply a sign to tell us when the season is approaching. No difference than when the word tells us that when we see wars and rumors of wars, this is telling us that the season is approaching where Yahoshua's coming is soon.
For this reason, I command to testify to you, that you may testify to them. For after your death, your children will disturb them, so that they will not make the year 364 days only. And for this reason, they will go wrong as to the new months and seasons and Shabbats and festivals. And they will eat all kinds of blood with all kinds of flesh.
So, those of you who are keeping the lunar calendar, the word says that your count must be 364 days. The lunar calendar has approximately 354 days, which means your feast days are going to be off. All right, so what is a full day? So, we just read Genesis 1 and 5. It says, "So the evening and the morning were the first day." Evening and morning makes a day. Leviticus 23. "It will be a Sabbath of complete rest to you, and you shall humble yourselves from evening of the 9th day of the month until the following evening you are to keep your Sabbath." So this is telling us again, this is about Yom Kippur. It's telling us from the evening on Friday till the evening sunset on Saturday. This is what makes up one day. So those of you who are keeping Shabbat, just the literal Saturday sunrise to sundown, that is incorrect. Deuteronomy 23. "Each day you shall give him his wages, and not let the sun go down on it, for he is poor and has set his heart on it, lest he cry out against you to Yahweh, and it be a sin to you." This again is giving us a concept of what a day is. And lastly, Deuteronomy 16 and 6, "There you must sacrifice the Passover in the evening when the sun goes down on the anniversary of your departure from Egypt." And we're going to read some more of that in a few minutes. So now that we know what a full day is, which is sunset to sunset, let's see if you can count. So hopefully the first portion of this video helped aid in your understanding of counting a day, because now it's time to dive back into the Exodus of our forefathers, as well as to read the testimony of our Messiah.
Exodus 12, starting at 1. Now Yahweh spoke to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first of the month of the year to you." And the Torah tells us that the beginning of months is the month of Abib, later known as Nisan. "Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, On the 10th of this month, every man shall take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household."
So we now know that time begins on Wednesday, which is the first of Abib. And Yahweh said that on the 10th day of the month, each household was required to take a lamb and observe it to make sure that it had no defect, so that it could be a perfect sacrifice. So we're going to count 10 days from the first, and we'll be able to see that the 10th day lands on Friday sunset and ends on Saturday at sunset. And they most likely picked out their lamb before Shabbat Friday, because I could only imagine that there was some work that had to be done in order to deal with cattle. And it says that they were to watch the lamb up until the 14th day, which would have equated to 3.5 days. So we're coming back to the Exodus. Real quick, we're going to talk about Abib. So don't forget that specifically on the 10th of this month, a lamb had to be taken per household in preparation for Pesach. Abib. So the word Abib in Hebrew means literally young ears. This is in reference to the young ears of a grain. And today we even use this word for the term spring. We all know what spring is and its signs. Vegetation begins to appear, animals come out of hiding, the temperature gradually increases, the barley begins to ripen, and it's even the one out of the 2 times in a year where the earth gets equal daylight and darkness. Today, according to the Gregorian calendar, we regard the first day of spring between March 20th and 21st on the third week of March. And meteorologically, the first day of spring is regarded on March 1st. Before the Gregorian calendar came to be, the equinox was between March 10th and 11th, which was the second week of March. These last few years, even the Jews have regarded the first day of spring to be between April 7th and April 8th. So which one is right? Daniel prophesies that man would think themselves to change time. Now I believe through the teachings of my spiritual leader, whom I believe to be a true shepherd of Yahweh, that the time begins on the first week, specifically the first Wednesday of every March. Enoch's calendar is a reflection of Earth's 7-day creation. This is the only calendar being 364 days that is divisible by 7, which results in a perfect synchronization that all of Yahweh's feasts, besides Shavuot and Yom Kippur, start on a Wednesday. Every other calendar, such as the lunar and the Gregorian calendar, will never equate to a full 24-hour day when it's divided up, too long or too short. Keep this in mind, this video is not to prove the beginning of Enoch's calendar, but to focus on the start of Passover.
Verse 4. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of the persons. According to each man's need, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight.
So it says they shall kill it at twilight. I don't like this word because it means after sunset. Anyone who has had experience roasting a lamb, especially a whole lamb, knows that it can take anywhere between 3 and 6 hours for that thing to get tender. Not to mention those of you again who have been keeping your Shabbat, your Passovers on a Shabbat. We are forbidden to cook on Shabbat. The rules that Yahweh delegated on Shabbat, he says that this is a perpetual statute forever. He's not going to alter his word to keep another feast day. If this was on a Shabbat, our forefathers would have been carrying heavy loads. We're not allowed to carry heavy loads on Shabbat. We're not allowed to travel on Shabbat. Thirdly, they were running for their lives, which is something we are not allowed to do on Shabbat. We have a prime example in Maccabees where it speaks of the Roman soldiers intentionally waiting on the Shabbat to attack the Israelites because they knew that they could not fight them back on Shabbat outside of the rebels that you eventually read about later on in the book. So those are 3 points to show you that the Exodus could not have occurred on Shabbat. Our memorial should also be on the same day that it happened. And had they had killed it at twilight, they wouldn't have been eating until after midnight. By the time they slaughtered it, cleaned it, made a fire, it would have been too late. So in the Hebrew, it actually says bein ha'arba'im, which means between the evenings. Today, we often associate the evening around 5, 6, 7 p.m. But this is not the case. The sun reaches its highest point at noon, and after it reaches this point, it's no longer ascending, but descending. If the sun is descending, this implies that the sun is in the process of setting, which is the start of an evening. So that would be between 12 and 6 p.m. That is considered an evening.
They shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat it. Then they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire, with unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it.
So I have the calendar up again. Let's go over it all the way through. Day of Abib begins on Wednesday. Yahweh commanded that on the 10th day of the month, 10 days later, we were to watch a lamb. That 10th day was on a Friday evening. Then we were to slaughter it on the 14th of the month. That would have been 3.5 days later. They killed the Passover between the evenings. That would have had to have been somewhere between 12 and 6. We know that it had to have been much earlier in the day, as lamb takes quite some time to slow roast.
Verse 15. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation. And on the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation for you. No manner of work shall be done on them, but that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared by you. So you shall observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread. For on this same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening.
It says that they were to eat the Passover at night, which would have led into the 15th of Abib, which is now Wednesday night. The Feast of Unleavened Bread was to continue 7 days up until the 21st of Abib. This would have been Wednesday night, the 15th, up until the following Wednesday at sunset. This would have concluded the full period of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So now that we have a backdrop of our forefathers' Exodus on the calendar of Abib, we're now going to pair that up with Yahoshua's testimony and see as well, when was he crucified? Was he crucified on a Shabbat, on Friday, as the Christians say, or was he crucified on Wednesday? So we will be reading through thoroughly the 4 accounts of Yahoshua in his last days before his crucifixion. And for this portion of the video, please hear the whole matter out before having your own conclusion.
John 11, starting at 45. Then many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen the things Yahushua did believed in him, but some of them went away to the Pharisees and told them the things he did. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, "What shall we do? For this man works many signs. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and nation." Caiaphas, being high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is expedient for that one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish." Verse 53. From that day on, they plotted to put him to death. Therefore Yahushua no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there into the country near the wilderness, to a city called Ephraim, and remained with his disciples. And the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They sought Yahushua and spoke among themselves as they stood in the temple, "What do you think, that he will not come to the feast?" Now both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a command that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it, that they might seize him. Keep in mind in verse 53 where it says the Pharisees plotted to put him to death. This is the beginning process of watching the lamb for 3.5 days, which began on the 10th of the month. During this period of time, the Pharisees were watching and observing Yahushua to find fault and blemish in him. John's account also told us that Passover was near. John 12, starting at 1. Then 6 days before the Passover, Yahushua came to Bethany, where Lazarus, who had been dead, whom he had raised from the dead. There they made him a supper, and Martha served. But Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him. Then Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard, anointed the feet of Yahushua, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray him, said, "Why was this fragrance not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box, and he used to take what was put in it. Verse 7. But Yahushua said, "Let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you have with you always, but me you do not have always." Now a great many of the Jews knew that he was there, and they came, not for Yahushua's sake only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. But the chief priests plotted to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Jews went away and believed in Yahushua. Okay, so we just finished some of John's account. He told us that this occurrence happened 6 days before the Passover. So let's read the other accounts. Is this actually 6 days before the Passover, 2 days before the Passover,
or when is it? Okay, so next we're going to read Matthew chapter 21. It says, "Now when they drew near Jerusalem and came to Bethphage and the Mount of Olives, then Yahoshua sent his 2 disciples, saying to them, Go into the village opposite of you, and immediately you will find a donkey and a colt with her. Loose them and bring them to me. And if anyone says anything to you, you shall say, The master has need of them, and immediately he will send them. And this was done that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet, saying, Tell the daughter of Zion, Behold, your king is coming to you, lowly and sitting on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey." So the disciples went and did as Yahoshua commanded them. So if you look at the 3 accounts, some of them just say Bethphage and others say Bethphage and Bethany. So I have a picture up. I know it's blocking Luke 19. I also encourage you all to read along with me. So you can open Luke 19 so that you can see it. I'll remove the photo in just a minute, but I'm just showing you that Bethphage and Bethany are 2 villages that are close to Jerusalem that sit on Mount Olives. And we can also see clearly on this map that Bethphage and Bethany, they are across from each other. According to the story we'll see later, it says that the disciples lodged at Bethany, so this would most likely mean they found the donkey in Bethphage. Verse 7, "They brought the donkey and the colt, laid their clothes on them, and set him on them. And a very great multitude spread their clothes on the road. Others cut down branches from the trees and spread them on the road. Then the multitudes who went before and those who followed cried out, saying, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh. Hosanna in the highest. And when he had come into Jerusalem, all the city was moved, saying, Who is this? So the multitude said, This is Yahoshua, the prophet from Nazareth of Galilee." All right, so here we can see that Yahoshua traveled either from Bethany or Bethphage down into Jerusalem, which was close by. So the time Yahoshua went up into Jerusalem, this was before the Passover. And before the Passover, it was custom that the firstborn male comes up to Jerusalem. This was the current situation or the feast that was going on before the Passover while Yahoshua was in Jerusalem. Verse 12. Then Yahoshua went into the temple of Yahweh and drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers, and the seats of those who sold doves. Then he left them and went out of the city to Bethany, and he lodged there. All right, so I've got the calendar of Abib here. The blue writing is the time of the Exodus, while the green writing is the time of Yahoshua. I have here on Friday the 9th, arrives to Bethany as well as Jerusalem. On the 10th, this begins the watching of the Lamb. This was around the same time when the Pharisees began, as I mentioned earlier, to plot and to find fault in Yahoshua when he came up into Jerusalem. Now, we didn't finish the whole story. I encourage you to read it on your own. As Yahoshua was coming up into Jerusalem on the donkey, everyone was praising Yahoshua, and the Pharisees, they were watching the Passover lamb, which we later find out is Yahoshua. So let's continue on with the story. Matthew 26. Now it came to pass when Yahoshua had finished all these sayings, that he said to his disciples, You know that after 2 days is the Passover, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified. And the chief priests and the scribes and the elders of the people assembled at the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and plotted to take Yahoshua by trickery and kill him. But they said, Not during the feast, lest there be an uproar among the people. And when Yahoshua was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him having alabaster flask a very costly fragrant oil, and she poured it on his head as he sat at the table. So Matthew 26 as well as Mark 14 is now indicating this is 2 days before the Passover. John was telling us that this incident, when Yahoshua came to Bethany and was anointed by Mary Magdalene with an alabaster box of oil, he said that this was 6 days before the Passover. So we can see that there is some contradictory here. Is it 6 days or is it 2 days before the Passover? And lastly, as you can see here, I'm still highlighting that the Pharisees, the priests, they were still plotting and planning to find a reason and an occasion to kill Yahoshua. Verse 17. Now on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the disciples came to Yahoshua, saying, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?" And he said, "Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, 'The teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house and with my disciples.'" So the disciples did as Yahoshua had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. When evening had come, he sat down with the 12. All right, so these three testimonies are now telling us that we are at the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, meaning the 14th of the month. So it mentions here clearly that the disciples are asking Yahoshua, "Where do you want us to prepare the Passover?" So I have had the blessing over the past course of years of keeping a Passover or the Feast of Unleavened Bread with as few as 2 people and as many as around 45 people. And all of these occasions, from year to year, including this past Passover, I have had a hand in helping to prepare for the Passover meal. So if you have prepared for a feast or a holy day for a large group of people, you know how much work is involved. Especially for Passover, we have to do cleaning. We're talking about roasting a lamb, which takes several hours to make. You have to make unleavened bread, which can take some time when we're talking about making it for a large group of people. There's no way possible that they waited the day of to prepare for the Passover meal, knowing, number one, that it takes hours for lamb to cook. And we're talking about 13 people. And I'm sure someone is thinking that I'm throwing out my own bias implication, but as we continue to read the story, we'll be able to see that this is not the Passover meal. Matthew 26:6. And as they were eating, Yahushua took bread and blessed it, and blessed and broke it, and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." Then he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, saying, "Drink it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is shed for many of the remissions of sins. But I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine from now on until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. So I've got 3 points here. John tells us something that is contradicting Matthew, Mark, and Luke's testimony. He tells us that this is before the Passover. So are we on Passover day or are we before the Passover? I'm saying we are before the Passover. The day has not yet come. It mentions, number 2, that they broke bread and they drank wine. Nowhere in here does it mention the bitter herbs or the most important part of the meal, which is the lamb. Thirdly, it mentions that after they sung, after they had their meal, and they went out to the Mount of Olives. We know on Passover night it is forbidden to leave the house until the morning. So they would have broken the commandment by leaving the house. And I got a 4th thing. Let's skip on to John 13 and start at verse 27. It says, "Now after the piece of bread, Satan entered him. Then Yahushua said to him, 'What you do quickly.' But no one at the table knew for what reason he said this to him. For some thought, because Judas had the money box, that Yahushua had said to him, 'Buy those things we need for the feast,' or that we should give something to the poor." So according to John's testimony, it is clear that the Passover is not here because in verse 1 it says that this was before the feast. And verse 29 is telling us that the disciples thought that the comment that Yahushua had said to Judas was in reference to preparing, to buying the things that they needed for the Passover. We're going to skip down to Matthew 26. We are going to be skipping around quite a bit because I'm trying to get to the point, but I invite you to read along with your Bible.
Matthew 26, starting at 36. Then Yahoshua came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and said to the disciples, Sit here while I go and pray over there. And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee. And he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. Then he said to them, My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me. He went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will.
Just for visuals, there is a map on the bottom right corner of the screen, and I'm showing you the village of Gethsemane. It is north from the village of Bethany at the foot of Mount Olives.
Matthew 26 and 47. And while he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, with a great multitude with swords and clubs, came from the chief priests and elders of the people. Then they came and laid hands on Yahoshua and took him. In that hour, Yahoshua said to the multitudes, Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to take me? I sat daily with you, teaching in the temple, and you didn't seize me. But all this was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples forsook him and fled. And those who had laid hold of Yahoshua led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance to the high priest's courtyard. And he went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Yahoshua to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none.
Let's do a brief summary. Yahoshua is now at Mount Olives. This is the same night after they finished eating their supper, what is often called the Last Supper. They go to Gethsemane, they seize him, and now they are taking him to Caiaphas, the priest, to go on trial. This trial is the process of still inspecting the lamb. So I'm going to show you on the calendar so we can see what it looks like. We are currently on Tuesday, the 13th of Abib, past sunset, going into the date of the 14th in the month of Abib. And he is still under inspection of the lamb.
Matthew 27, starting at 1. When morning came, all the chief priests and elders of the people plotted against Yahoshua to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate the governor. Verse 15. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to releasing to the multitude one prisoner whom they wished. John 18, starting at 13. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, Behold your king. And when the 6th hour was come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Yahoshua cried with a loud voice, saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is, being interpreted, my power, why hast thou forsaken me? And some of them that stood by, when they heard it, said, Behold, he calleth Elias. And one ran and filled a sponge full of vinegar, and put it on a reed, and gave him to drink, saying, Let alone. Let us see whether Elias will come to take him down.
John mentions that the priest sent Yahoshua to be exiled under the Roman authority so that they themselves could be able to partake of the Passover meal. Why? If they were the ones to have put Yahoshua to death, they would have all been unclean. They wouldn't have been able to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread nor take part of the Passover meal. So this all alludes to that again, Passover has not yet started. So why did the soldiers give Yahoshua wine or vinegar? So I've heard some suggest that it was help to soothe the pain. I also am aware that the Seventh-day Adventist Church teaches it's a sin to drink wine because we see a lot of scriptures where it speaks of people who drink wine, they are drunkards, not realizing that this is a double-fold meaning. A drunkard or a wine bibber is considered someone who is high off of pride and off of their own understanding. And yes, anybody who is a drunkard is in sin. The soldiers were mocking him. If he was thirsty, they would have given him some water. Also, they knew that it was the Passover. He was a Jew, and that during the Passover season, they know that it is forbidden to drink vinegar or anything fermented. So this was them trying to defile him during the Passover. The vinegar would have made his sacrifice unacceptable to Yahweh. So let's go back to Mark chapter 15, verse 25. It says that in the third hour of the day, they crucified Yahushua. The third hour of the day in Roman time was 3 p.m. If you can recall the scripture that we went over at the beginning of this video, when Yahweh commanded the Israelites to slaughter the lamb, he said to slaughter it between the evenings. We went over that an evening begins at 12 p.m., which is when the sun begins to set. So the evening consists of 12 p.m. to 6 p.m., and that middle slot would be 3 o'clock. And this is the same time Yahushua was crucified. Did Yahushua really get up on the cross and cry out to Yahweh, "Why have you forsaken me?" When the whole 3 years as he was with his disciples, he was preparing them and readying himself that the day would come when the Son of Man would be betrayed. The night before he got crucified, he prayed that Yahweh would strengthen him to be ready to fulfill his Father's will and not his own will. So he already knew what the plan was before he got up on the cross beam. So for him to say that, that would have been really weak. It would have nullified his sacrifice. And of course, this is one of the scriptures that the non-messianics use, that Yahushua, who came already, is not the Messiah. So what is this phrase, Eloi, Eloi, or some say Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani mean? The word Eloi or Eli comes from the word El, which means power. And the suffix yud is the shortened form of the word ani, which is my power. Now keep note that this phrase is Aramaic, it's not Hebrew. His next set of words was lama. The word lama in Hebrew, we have translated this word to fit in English terms as the word why, but it's actually a conjunction of two words put together. The first word is le or la. It can change depending on context. Le or la means to or for. And then the word ma, this means, on surface, it generally means what, but it may often be used to insinuate the term how. So it means for what, or for what reason, or to this reason. Sabachthani. This again is Aramaic, and yes, it literally means to forsake or to leave. But there is also a Hebrew word that has a shared congruent meaning, which is azav, and it also literally means to leave or to forsake. Through the testimonies of Yahushua, we can see clearly his fulfillment of prophecy through both his words and most certainly his actions. And many of the Psalms of David speaks of Yahushua. These songs or psalms that David sung were not just beautiful words, they were prophecy. Psalms 22 mentions David's envisionment of Yahushua's coming. And he says the same exact sentence Yahushua said on the cross. David foresaw what Yahushua would go through several hundred years after him. Let's read a small portion of it. It says, "The chief musician set to the deer of the dawn, a psalm of David, my power, why have you forsaken me?" And this phrase is lama azaftani. Why are you so far from helping me and from the words of my groaning? O my power, I cry in the daytime, but thou hearest not, and in the night season, and am not silent. But you are holy, enthroned in the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in you. They trusted, and you delivered them. They cried to you and were delivered. They trusted in you and were not ashamed. But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men, and despised by the people. All those who see me ridicule me. They shoot out the lip. They shake the head, saying, "He trusted in Yahweh. Let him rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. Many bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They gape at me with their mouths, like a raging and a roaring lion. They look and stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." Everything that David saw in this prophetical vision was exactly what happened during Yahushua's exile. He was considered a reproach, and he was despised by his people because he trusted in Yahweh. And our wicked forefathers mocked and scoffed at him and said, "If you be the Messiah, then you save yourself. Let his blood be on us and on our children." Just because we supposedly have came to the knowledge of being under Yahweh's covenant. Who's to say that we aren't the descendants of the group of individuals who said, "Let his blood be on us and our children"? We have to all confess and repent for that. That curse is still on us. In the Hebrew, it says, Eli, Eli, lama azaftani, rachok meyeshuati, divrei sha'agati. Those of you who are able to read the Hebrew, you might can see that it is clear when it says lama azaftani. This is David seeing Yahoshua in the future. This is Yahoshua speaking. But in the next set of words, it says rachok meyeshuati. Why are you far, or why are you distant from my salvation? And we know that his salvation is Yahoshua. David is having a conversation with Yahweh. David is seeing this vision and asks Yahweh, why does it seem that you have forsaken your son? Why is it that he's going to go through all these tribulations? The word tells us that his son, Yahoshua, would be oppressed, he would be sacrificed for his people, and that this would please Yahweh. And Yahoshua understood that before he got on the cross. He understood that this was the reason, this is Lama, for this purpose, that he went through all these tribulations and oppressions for the will of Yahweh, that he would be the first fruit and an open door for his righteous seed to receive salvation. This was not a question, it was a statement. So let me show you all on the calendar. Yahoshua was crucified on Wednesday the 14th in between the evenings, which is 3 p.m. And he was put into the grave by sunset, as we know. And just for further proof that Yahoshua was not crucified on a Friday, Daniel prophesies that in the middle of the week, Yahoshua would put down the sacrificial system. The middle of the week is not a Friday. We all know the story. He rose on the first day of the week. So let's count 3 days and 3 nights. So he was put in the grave just before sunset on the 14th. So that would be the 15th through the 16th. That is day 1, a full 24 hours. 16th through the 17th. That's day 2, a full 24 hours. The 17th through the 18th. That is day 3, a full 24 hours. He resurrected early in the morning. So this concludes the Passover portion of Yahoshua's testimony in congruence to our forefathers' Exodus, as well as our memorial of keeping the Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread year to year. The purpose of this video, again, was to prove that Passover can only begin on a Wednesday, and in the month of Abib, which is March, is not April, nor is it February. Now, I didn't go into detail explaining Enoch's calendar, but I do believe that I shared enough for you to grasp the concept of it. And I do believe that I made it well aware that the lunar calendar is a no-no. Many of our people don't realize the importance of the calendar, and keeping the proper calendar is congruent with us receiving salvation. A lot of people say, well, Yah will bring understanding when we get into the wilderness. No, there are basic topics such as his name, his law, and the calendar that are fundamental concepts that must be understood. Of course, he's going to give us a higher understanding when we get to the wilderness, but there are things that we already need to have a fundamental foundation of before even getting into the wilderness. And Yahweh said that he will gather the daughter of Zion in her appointed time, or Yahweh's feast. He is going to gather his people during the holy day season. And if you're a whole month late, you've missed the wedding. The doors are closed. So I hope everybody who has been keeping the lunar calendar, who has had their Passovers on a Friday, I hope that this has revealed some understanding. I hope that the next feast season, as well as all the feast days, because all of the feast days start on a Wednesday, but Passover, as this is our topic of discussion today, I hope that there will be some changes for everybody, including myself. So I wish everybody a good, reflective, and a life-changing season, and thank you for watching.